That billion-dollar expansion plan will cut through the heart of Bridgeton.
It was like a bulldozer to democracy.
I'm really concerned that we'll end up with a white elephant.
W1W will not give St. Louis a world-class airport.
We are fighting for more than our homes and our city. We are fighting for the American dream, the right to work hard, to buy one's own home, to be able to protect that home from unjust and unfair confiscation. We, the citizens of Bridgeton, ask you please to come to our city and help us tell our story, the story of a community fighting the battle of a lifetime against tremendous odds.
The F4 airport expansion proposal cutting into Bridgeton was gone, but Carrollton wasn't the same.
Demolition of homes is underway in the Carrollton area. It's part of the ongoing noise abatement program.
They want to stay, but as homes come down, so do their property values. And many wonder how long they can hold out.
Lambert Airport bought out some 229 homes in a subdivision, then demolished them, leaving gaps of empty land where the houses once stood.
In serving on the airport commission and seeing how the airport actually handled buyouts, even for just noise, was pathetic. The airport would buy properties when they felt it suited them.
There are some people in Bridgeton who say if they don't sell, they'll be forced out anyway because of what they call blockbusting.
You would have house, flat land, house, flat, nothing, or even a vacant house be sitting. So the idea of blockbusting is this theory that the airport would purchase a house, and for the sole purpose of vacating it, letting it sit abandoned, and kind of making a show to everybody else that is around that we are going to buy this area. Your time here is limited. It did create fear, for those that were left behind.
Conrad Bowers had just finished his 8th year as mayor of Bridgeton, getting his city through the F4 expansion plan. But the fact that the city of St. Louis was still able to take homes in his city with no firm expansion plan in place led him to a revelation.
In 1995, I decided to run for mayor again because I realized that we're looking at all this property that was purchased for the F4 plan under the guise of noise abatement, and there's going to be real problems. And so I decided to run. And not only that, to stay, because at that time we could have moved anywhere. We could have moved, but no, Bridgeton is home. We're going to stay.
Conrad he's a Boy Scout. He's very principled, and he wasn't going to give up because the political power told him that wasn't what he should be doing. And he also recognized very practically, he looked at the amount of real estate that was going to be taken by any expansion, and he recognized that his city would cease to exist as an entity if St. Louis achieved what it wanted to achieve.
Study after study after study has shown that if you are to accomplish what you need to accomplish at Lambert, you have to go west.
And on July 6, 1995, it would happen again to Bridgeton.
Lambert Airport officials have picked the airport expansion plan known as W1W.
This alternative gives us the increased capacity to meet the aviation needs for the St. Louis region well into the 21st century.
That billion-dollar expansion plan will cut through the heart of Bridgeton.
Though we know your sacrifice will be great, it is in the best interest of the region that we move forward.
Bridgeton is going to do what is necessary to protect Bridgeton.
W1W had an original price tag of $2.6 billion, which included a new runway nearly 2 miles long going west into Bridgeton, plus the extension of runway 12 right, and eventually the construction of a new terminal.
The plan as presented will never happen, and W1W, even enhanced, cannot happen because of the additional cost.
The proposed new runway again would decimate the city of Bridgeton, including the entire Carrollton neighborhood.
You have an antiquated airport that they're wanting to spend another $2 billion on and destroy a third of our city, and we just don't think it's worthwhile to do that.
W1W, that as we learn more about it, would destroy more than 2,000 homes, dislocate 6,000 people, 6 churches, 2 of those with schools, 75 businesses. When we heard that, we thought, this is insane.
Bridgeton is not against meaningful airport expansion. W1W is not good for the metropolitan area.
So a new fight would begin between Bridgeton and the city of St. Louis, with similar themes as the F4 fight, but new faces for Lambert expansion emerged with W1W. Freeman Bosley Jr. was now the mayor of St. Louis, and his successor, Clarence Harmon, continued the push for expansion. But the #1 soldier for W1W was the man who told Bridgeton just 9 years earlier that the airport would not expand westward, Colonel Leonard Griggs, who after being fired by Vince Schamel in 1987 as airport director, was brought back on by Bosley.
Griggs would, if he'd stand here, I'd tell him, and he'd curse me, and I'd curse him a little bit back, it'd be all right. He was more in your face and more gruff.
I'm not answering a hypothetical question.
No, it's not hypothetical. It's in writing.
I have no comment. Why is that? Because I have no comment. Why? Because I have no comment. If we don't build this runway, we'll be a major city stuck on the Mississippi River that again is going to go into decline.
Leonard did not like to be challenged. He was a retired colonel, and nobody was supposed to question his decisions. What he said was the way to go. Being an engineer, being community-minded, I didn't accept that. And Leonard didn't like that. So
Bridgeton found political support again from their congressman from the 2nd Congressional District. This time, it was Jim Talent.
I'm really concerned that we'll end up with a white elephant, that the plan was at best a marginal improvement and at worst a potential white elephant for the area, and that would be a disaster.
They picked the one course of action that, to me, was just not justifiable. It was incoherent.
The community fight against Lambert from Bridgeton would evolve as well. Bridgeton Air Defense still played a role, but not with the same firepower. So somebody new would have to step up to help the fight against Lambert expansion into Bridgeton.
I'm Sarah Barwinski, and I lived at 4410 Fifi Road.
Sarah Barwinski was facing her second buyout in just a few years. Her husband Dan was pastor of Shepherd of the Hills Church. The church moved from the Carrollton neighborhood next to Bridgeton City Hall on Natural Bridge Road in 1993 after the airport bought them out for noise abatement. The Barwinskis' home and church were now both in the buyout path of W1W, and their sentiment against the city of St. Louis and Lambert rang the same tune as those who opposed the F4 plan.
It was just maddening that in a supposed democracy, someone that I don't even vote for, who won't return our phone calls, who just write us off, would have the power to take our homes. Taxation without representation, well, condemnation without representation is far worse.
Oh no, W1W! Oh no, W1W! Oh no, W1W!
We know it's too expensive. We know that it's technically flawed. We know that we will fight it till the end.
No representation for Bridgeton. It was like a bulldozer to democracy. Not only were they going to take people's homes, they were going to shut people up.
Sarah Barwinski launched People Building Community shortly after the W1W announcement, and she described it as a coalition of community grassroots groups working together, which included Bridgeton Air Defense and St. Charles citizens against aircraft noise. The Barwinskis were ready to take up the cause and wanted to get the facts and better educated on why this was a flawed plan.
And is it really for the common good?
If it truly is going to serve the region, I'll take my money and run. But if it's a bad plan, they have no business destroying a good community.
Because I've always said, and said throughout the process, that if in fact they could show me that this was the best plan for the region, that we would cease and desist, but they could never do that.
Two groups who argued the technical flaws of the plan were the Airline Pilots Association and the National Association of Air Traffic Controllers. The ideal design of an airfield would have parallel runways so you can have independent and simultaneous operations. The runway configuration under proposed W1W would exist nowhere else in the world.
The staggered runway that we have jutting into Bridgeton is useful as an arm hanging out of your head.
The fact that the runways are staggered had the effect of increasing taxi times greatly. The money it costs to run an airplane when it's not flying, whether it's just sitting stable on the ground or it's spending time taxiing, is wasted money.
They knew so little about air traffic. They were like graphics people that put a runway down on a piece of paper and said, this will look cool. We were still going to be stuck with this antiquated procedures that we were using at the time. W1W just didn't. It just added more complexity to a very complex airport already.
I went to the air traffic controllers and I showed them the configuration early in this. And one of the guys says to me, he says, well, look, why don't you just, he starts laughing. He says, why don't you just build the runways end to end like this? And I said to him, well, look, can this be operated safely? He says, oh, we'll operate it safely. He says, you just won't get any additional capacity.
And capacity was one of the many points of contention throughout this fight. Lambert was serving more than 25 million passengers and handling more than 500,000 aircraft operations in the mid to late 1990s.
We project that we need to develop an airport, if all things continue and all things being equal, and the FAA I think will back us on this, that we need to put together an airport that will be able to handle 632,000 takeoffs and landings and 40 million people in the year 2015. We can't do that with the airport the present size.
Flying point to point was starting to dilute the need to have a hub and spoke system. So that trend was already started. The projection numbers that they had, both for passenger projections and the number of airplane operations, which what we were really concerned about, the number of airplanes that come and go out of St. Louis. Those projections we thought were really rosy. The idea that they needed to spend all that money based on those numbers was really not on very solid ground.
Some of the claims are exaggerated, and some of the claims of the existing airport capacity are understated. The difference provides the advantage, the operational efficiency, the improvement that's needed here, and it's just not provided by W1W.
The business community in the St. Louis region was firmly behind expansion, and they forecasted billions of dollars in additional revenue from Griggs' preferred expansion plan.
I think the bottom line is, years ago the decision was made to keep Lambert where it is. This airport is worth $4.5 billion to this economy. That $4.5 billion, if we can expand this airport, is going to be worth something in the neighborhood of $10 to $15 million in the year 2010. Is this something you want to give away? Is this something that you want to fly to the state of Missouri? I don't think so.
One thing we know about forecasts is they're always wrong. I think that's the reality, because we can't account for all the things that are going to change along the way.
If Leonard Griggs wanted to meet his aviation and economic projections, he would need a configuration with runways that could operate simultaneously in bad weather. Lambert couldn't do that because its parallel runways were only 1,300 feet apart and needed more space in between the runways to operate simultaneously in bad weather.
It's fine when the sun is shining, but when the sun does not shine and you get down to where you can't see your shoes, you're down to one runway. And that cuts it dramatically down what this airport can produce. So having said all of that, W1W was the best alternative.
It didn't make it better. It made it to some extent more complicated in bad weather. This whole design of this airport was always to increase operations in bad weather. So anything we got, we needed to have runways separated far enough apart and thresholds close enough apart that we could run simultaneous operations. This layout didn't do any of that.
When the weather conditions start to deteriorate slightly and you go into instrument flight rules, the capacity of a W1W configured Lambert will be no better essentially than what we have today, after $2.6 billion.
W1W will not give St. Louis a world-class airport.
Don Jacobs says analysis of W1W by the airline pilots reveals a plan that may not dramatically improve capacity or delays, and will not give Lambert officials what they want most: to land two planes at the same time in bad weather.
The runways are still too closely spaced for simultaneous independent approaches in all weather conditions.
In mailouts, Airport Director Leonard Griggs has dismissed the pilots' concerns. So Jacobs sent a letter to Griggs saying W1W, quote, will not produce a peak efficiency, could be a hoax on the community, and a white elephant.
The justification they gave for it was that we would be able to land simultaneously, operate simultaneously in really bad weather. But everybody who knew airports, who was not connected with the airport itself, was telling me, no, because of the stagger of the runway, you can't operate simultaneously. So the reason they gave for it was not something that the plan would deliver.
You know, bullshit overcomes science occasionally, and there's always a cost to that.
And the financial cost, of course, was in the billions of dollars, and the city of St. Louis was assuming the brunt of the risk in this expansion project.
Everyone agrees that if the new runway were placed next to the two existing ones, there would be no problem. But W1W will be built 12,400 feet farther west because airport officials say that is where it makes the most economic sense.
All the expenses will come from airport revenue, and that means money, profits from parking, from concession sales, landing fees, and surcharges on tickets.
I mean, I would tell people in the press and at meetings, I would say, look, the federal government's not paying for this. Okay, this is not federal money that we can just afford to waste and it won't affect the region. We're going to have to borrow this money. And if we don't get the capacity, we're blowing the remaining credit of the airport and digging ourselves into a huge hole.
We are stunned, we're surprised because there's so many better alternatives. W1W is a disaster.
There were many proposals about which direction to take Lambert expansion, and based on the airport's own study, one alternative was better operationally. The pilots preferred expanding south, also known as the S1 plan.
Well, S1 would have provided runway separation because you really needed airplanes to the airport that's wide, not long. And that would accomplish that horrible cost. But operationally, that would have made it been the airport, and the terminal would have been the right place too. So that would have been a superior plan from an operational standpoint.
According to the study, S1 would have wiped out at least 1,000 more homes than W1W across multiple municipalities and would cost at least $300 million more.
Airport officials tell us the W1W plan was selected because it requires the least amount of land acquisition and it costs less than other plans.
But looking at it from a cost-benefit standpoint from Lambert's own research numbers, adding a runway to the northeast, known as the NE1A alternative, was by far the superior plan.
I would like to see the runway built on the north side of the airport, in fact, almost totally on airport property. That will do everything that W1W will do for just a fraction of the cost.
You know, this was the result of a several-year planning process, and through most of that planning process, they were leaning towards the NE1A plan, and would have given them substantial capacity. Then at the last minute, they changed to W1W.
Suppose I'd have taken what we called NE1A. In 5 to 10 years, we'll have to come back because we still cannot handle the forecast instrument traffic. We feel that W1W allows Lambert to go in the 21st century.
We can quote you on that.
It will take us in the 21st century. Yes, you may.
This is a very big plan that costs an awful lot of money, that's very disruptive, and we just went through that with F4 and ended up with an unworkable and unaffordable plan. And what I'm saying is we know we can add an additional runway at less cost, at less disruption, and then leave the way open for further expansion if we needed it.
Why go west through Bridgeton when you could come east here through Kinloch? As you can see, much of Kinloch has already been bought out. More of it will be. But airport officials say coming east does not give them enough room to space the runways the way they want to.
Today, the FAA demands that you must have 3,400 feet centerline to centerline between two runways to be able to land in bad weather. W1W will allow us to have the land and give us a separation distance between the runways.
The FAA announced they would only conduct an environmental impact study on W1W and S1, leaving NE1A out because it only had 2,500 feet of runway separation.
What became pretty clear was that it was a plan in search of a rationale. Yeah, it stuck in my craw. I mean, both because of what it would do to my constituents, but also because we were going to spend all this money borrowing it all and not get capacity, so it would cripple the airport going forward. And I can't repeat enough their own justification for this, that they'd be able to have simultaneous operations in really bad weather, which is only like 5 or 6% of the time, by the way, okay? And they can't.
The Air Traffic Controllers Association also preferred the NE1A plan, but why did Lambert pull the plug on NE1A in favor of W1W? One reason was the city wanted federal dollars to help fund the multi-billion-dollar project, but couldn't get help from the feds if they expanded north or east.
St. Louis officials are meeting in Washington this afternoon, trying to get federal funds for Lambert Airport expansion.
Officials say they'd like to get as much as $200 million from the government.
President Clinton issued the executive order on environmental justice. You cannot impact communities that are of a lower income status using federal funds that would be detrimental.
The political structure in this part of the county was really stacked against Bridgeton, whether it be the congressional districts and all the effort that St. Louis had gone to make sure the districts included the leadership of the city and the leadership of the county. But politically, Bridgeton did not have a lot of power, and it was fighting a 20th century political machine.
But that's not how, you know, airport planning should be done. It shouldn't be politics. It should be, you know, what's safety, what's capacity, what can we deliver for the best cost.
Sarah and Dan Barwinski continue to learn and also educate others through people building community about all the technical and financial flaws of the W1W plan, and found allies not just in Bridgeton and St. Charles, but in the entire region as well.
I think think for the region as a whole, and this is a problem with as carved up as St. Louis area is in different pieces, they might not even be able to tell you where Bridgeton or Cool Valley or, is on a map. They just know it's not their community. I think there is a philosophy of divide and conquer in terms of groups, and we saw it at play, people trying to divide Bridgeton with each other. And so then the other philosophy is that we're better together. And what I found when I worked with people with Cool Valley and Kinloch was actually a lot of solidarity, because they knew what we had gone through.
The Barwinskis and people building community would also forge a relationship with Tom Brown and the Pilots Association, and they complemented each other's message on why W1W wasn't the right plan for Lambert and the region.
Operating airplanes is pretty scientific. When you disregard that science in favor of something squishy like I want a world-class airport, in favor of what you think are going to be political gains, and especially when the politicians can make decisions that they're never held accountable for. People in Bridgeton were more than willing to throw themselves under the bus if it was going to accomplish something. But the idea that it wasn't going to accomplish something, and they knew it and we knew it, that was especially painful to watch.
The first time I met Tom, he was in his uniform and he was doing all of his things. Oh, this is Sarah Barwinski, And he said, well, I need you to know, this isn't about saving your home. He, unlike his predecessors, was not afraid to speak very loudly the truth to power.
W1W would continue to pass major hurdles, including winning environmental approval from the FAA in December 1997. A favorable record of decision seemed imminent in 1998, but the Airline Pilots Association questioned the FAA's study and continued their arguments that the W1W expansion plan would not make Lambert a world-class airport.
The pilots union claims the FAA study numbers are flawed, but questioning the figures used to justify the new runway in Bridgeton.
Our concern is that for a massive capital investment, W1W may be just a very incremental improvement as opposed to a major improvement.
You spend $2.6 billion or $3 billion or whatever the price finally comes out to be, and you don't get much for it.
When you talk about $2.6 billion for a runway, for something that's only going to give a limited increase in capacity, financially it doesn't make any sense.
It adds significant capacity. It would allow us to handle 632,000 operations in the year 2015 compared to the 514 today. It will take us from 40 to 65 million people. Anybody who can count knows that's a significant increase in capacity.
There is one test that would resolve the disagreements. It's called a real-time study. Air traffic controllers and pilots would actually simulate the takeoffs and landings that would occur with the new airport configuration. In fact, in this July 13, 1998 memo, FAA officials called for a real-time study, quote, at the earliest convenience.
We had been working hand in glove with people in flight safety and other divisions at the FAA for this real-time study. It was sound.
And I was more than willing to bet my reputation on the fact that a real-time study would prove that W1W is not worth the money.
If the real-time simulation does prove us wrong, we're going to withdraw our opposition. We'll get behind W1W and we'll push it.
On July 23, 1998, 10 days after that FAA memo calling for a real-time study, Missouri Congressman and House Minority Leader at the time, Dick Gephardt, held a closed-door meeting with FAA Administrator Jane Garvey, as well as a delegation from St. Louis to lobby for W1W.
This was clearly an arm-twisting meeting. The supporters told Garvey they believe W1W has been studied enough and they want quick approval.
City and Lambert officials talked for an hour to the FAA administrator and tried to alleviate her concerns of 3 safety issues.
And the FAA at Congressman Gephardt's office saw only a one-sided proposal. No opponents were invited to today's meeting.
Dick Gephardt told us just the other day, Jeff, that a decision is needed very quickly on this. He says if a decision is not made by the end of July, then federal money cannot be released for this throughout the year.
And on July 31st, 1998, Garvey wrote a letter to Gephardt, paving the way for W1W.
It's being approved. W1W is going to go forward, and that's good news.
It looks like it will happen. The Federal Aviation Administration gives the go-ahead to expand Lambert Airport.
This is more than just a runway. This is a $2.6 billion program that will give this area a brand new runway, will solve the capacity problem at Lambert.
You are going to destroy the city with W1W.
In the letter, Garvey told Gephardt that the FAA was satisfied with all remaining safety concerns. Garvey also said the FAA will not be proceeding with a real-time simulation because they were satisfied that the procedures of W1W were safe and a real-time study wasn't necessary.
Gephardt told the pilots, well, why are you doing this the 11th hour? It's not the 11th hour. They said that all along and were ignored.
I was pretty confident that if they took us up on that the W1W would die its natural, well-deserved death, but they didn't.
2 months after the Garvey letter, the FAA gave a favorable record of decision and its final approval for W1W. After the record of decision, there was still a push from Tom Brown and the Pilots Association for a real-time simulation, and Bridgeton and St. Charles even offered to pay the $60,000 for the 3-month study, but the FAA wouldn't accept it.
Madam, it is not my choice to do a real-time study. It's the FAA's, and as far as I'm concerned, it would be a worthless expenditure of effort and money. That ends the interview. Thank you.
I think he was wrong. No, I think he was wrong. I think maybe he knew, understood that the real-time study would prove that W1W wasn't worth the money. We were hoping that the science would win over the politics, but then, as it turned out, it didn't.
Griggs felt like the pilots and the air traffic controllers should be able to make anything work. And if politically that was the best plan, then, well, guys, you just make this plan work.
It was a political solution. It was a political solution. It was a political choice. And you look at the structure, the airport governors, what else could happen? It was really decided on the basis of politics.
Bridgeton took the decision to court, but ran out of legal challenges by April 7th, 2000.
It was a narrow decision, the U.S. Court of Appeals voting 2-1, upholding the Federal Aviation Administration's review of the $2.6 billion expansion of Lambert Field.
If people look at the dissenting decision, they'll see what is really relevant.
And I find that his findings were spot on with everything that we were saying. They had a 3-tier review when they looked at the plans. Any 1A was thrown out on the very first tier, so it never got consideration further down the line. And the judge's point was, he felt they were at fault by throwing it out in that first tier review rather than going down to actually assessing the environmental impact and weighing that against the cost. And if they had considered any 1A at that stage, I think it would have won out over W1W.
With politics winning over science, it looked like Leonard Griggs and the city of St. Louis were on the cusp of creating what they thought would be a world-class airport for the region. However, there were forces brewing for some time in the airline industry that Lambert officials in the city of St. Louis should have seen coming, something that was essential to the full $2.6 billion W1W expansion plan.
Leaders, to some extent voters and the press, were going like, well, gee, it can't be as bad as Talent's saying it is, because they wouldn't do anything that dumb. And yet my experience, I've been around government for a long time, and yes, it is possible.
There also has to be a dose of honesty so that we don't leave some white elephant to our grandchildren here, and having told them that this was going to be some great world-class facility, and having spent all this money to find out that it really wasn't.